Welcome to Macon Memories. I'm Lynda Wright at Randolph-Macon College. Today is June the 4th, 2014, and I'm here with Professor Dan McCaffrey, Professor of Classics at the college. Dan, can you tell us when and how you happened to come to teach at Randolph-Macon?
When is pretty easy. I came in September of 1974. And how I came was kind of an interesting story. For many years, I'd been in graduate school at the University of Michigan, and I would go back to New Jersey for the summer. And when I'd come back in the fall, I would hear stories about this lady that came to Randolph-Macon to get her master's degree. She came from Virginia, and she was famous among the department for making mint juleps, although I never had one. So she, it turns out that she was married to a professor, or became married to a professor at Randolph-Macon, Robert Epps Jones. They had been close friends for many years. They had met years ago at the American School, or the American Academy in Rome summer program, to which Greg Doherty and Kathy Doherty went, where they met as a couple. Well, so did Robert Epps and Lucille Cox meet at the American Academy Summer School. And they each were taking care of aged parents for many, many years. And of course, in the old days, you didn't get married when you were taking care of your elderly parents. And so they waited like 40 years to get married, so that George Oliver said to them, professor of history, when they finally did get married, marry in haste, repent at leisure. And they didn't repent. They continued to enjoy a lovely and happy marriage. And anyway, coming back to the summers in Ann Arbor, Lucille Cox, later Jones, was very fond of this professor of Latin, Frank Copley, who was my favorite professor when I was there in the fall and winter terms, and in fact he directed my dissertation. So when Dr. Jones was sent into retirement against his will in 1974, early in 1974 I guess it was, they called up Frank Copley and said, do you have any young students coming along who would be ready to come and teach here next year? And Frank said, yes, I've got this guy McCaffrey. He's teaching at Hope College just for 1 year, so he could come and take over in classics there. And so I got my application in very early, right away, and got to the front of the list that way, thanks to the Old Girl Network. That's how I got my job at Randolph-Macon. And we moved here in August of 75, and our daughter was 6 weeks old when we moved here. And she was in her little car seat, much simpler then than they are now. So that we could just pick it up and carry it into a restaurant with us as we were moving here. And she was a perfect little traveler all the way east from Holland, Michigan, until we got to Washington. And then we hit traffic, and she started throwing a fit. So that was our introduction to the Washington area, with the baby crying her eyes out. Yeah.
Well, so when you arrived in Ashland, you mentioned Robert Epps Jones had retired. So were you the classics department?
No, I wasn't. There was another man who was in his terminal year. He had not gotten tenure in what we call the Greek position. he had the Greek position, and he had not been tenured, so he was in his last year. So he was very kind to me. He could have been bitter and mean and taken it out on me, but he was very kind gentleman. His wife and son also lived down the block from campus, and his son was a great introduction to me. He was about 8 or 9 at the time, into Southern living.
How so?
Because, well, he's the first person I knew. I knew people said y'all, but I didn't really believe it coming from the north. I would walk around campus the first few weeks with a big grin on my face, hearing people really talk that way. It sounded very strange to me. And I knew that they said y'all, but I didn't know that around here anyway, some of the people will use y'all to refer to one person. They'll say, how are y'all, meaning you singular. And so to specify, they would sometimes say all y'all if it was plural. And one time, this young man asked me one day, he was a very polite, nice young man, and he said to me, I met him on the street, and he said, oh, how's all y'all's baby? I had never heard much of all y'all, and there was the possessive all y'all's baby.
Well, that it is spoken like a true linguist. You're interested. You felt like you were studying another foreign language.
That's
like
right. Yes.
A living language at that point. That's cute. Well, where did you live? You mentioned down the street. Did you live close to campus when you moved in?
Well, we did. We worked through a faculty member who helped us find an apartment. We didn't have time or money since my wife was pregnant, and then we had a brand new baby, to do anything but shop by correspondence. So we ended up in Misty Pines Apartments on Arlington Street, which was not very attractive in those days. I don't think it's much better now. And there were several faculty members down there, and we tended to call it Misery Pines. And so when we got here, our furniture hadn't arrived. It took a long time since we had a partial load on the moving van, so we had to wait till they found something to fill up the rest of the load with. And so it took a few weeks. And so we would only been here a day or two when I got a call from Captain Reed, the treasurer, telling me that my books had arrived. And so he said to me, Dr. McCaffrey, your books have arrived. And I said, oh, great, I'll come over to the business office and I'll pick them up. Sorry.
That's right.
So I said, I'll come over and pick it up. And he said, oh, that's all right. I'll have a couple of the boys come and carry it over to you. And so I figured he had some students coming to bring the books with me. But no, it was 2 white-haired black men bringing me my books. And I thought, oh, what have I moved into if they're calling these white-haired black men the boys?
Right.
And it was a different world in Ashland, and that was the beginning of my education. We were told that if we stayed long enough, our daughter's children would be accepted in Hanover County because she was 6 weeks old, so she'd always be a damn Yankee.
Oh my goodness! But then your wife is expected, so you had a child who was born in Virginia. So
later on, about 5 years later,
okay.
we had a child that was born in Virginia, and he always lorded it over us. He was a real Virginian, and we were all just carpetbaggers.
Right.
And so many years later, when we got to go to Turkey for a J-term with some students, we made sure we went into one of the bazaars and bought a suitcase made from a Turkish carpet. So we were truly carpetbaggers.
So it made you authentic.
Yes.
Very good. Well, thank you for already there's so many good stories. Now, so you came into the department, and there was one person in his final year, and then you were young and obviously starting a long, well, you didn't know, I guess, but hopefully a long tenure at Randolph-Macon. So talk about what it was like teaching and in those early years, and how, just what it was like, where you taught, and that kind of thing.
Okay, the classics department was all over in Haley Hall, and I had my own classroom. I was the only person who taught in Haley 1, and Greg taught in Haley 2, I think it was, or the other way around. When I got here, it was somebody else teaching, as I mentioned. I should get to Greg. That first year I was here, I was on probation we had a 5-year probationary period. And in the first year of your probationary period back then, your contract was not renewed until the beginning of March. And so when the big national meetings came along in December, I had to go and interview candidates for what we call the Greek position. But I wasn't assured of having the Latin position for the next year. So I was looking for interviews as well as giving interviews. And I had been trained both in Latin and Greek, so I also applied for and interviewed myself for the Greek position. And damn, was I good. I knew the answer to every question.
And that was the Greek position. Where were you? I mean, and tell us more about where you were interviewing. And I think that's where you ran into Greg, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. But he didn't have his dissertation completed in hand. And so one of our chief criteria was you had to have the degree in hand. And he didn't have it, and he didn't look like he would have it by September, which disqualified him, really. So the people from University of Richmond were big fans of his. He had been there as an undergraduate. And so they talked me into it, and we sat down just informally at a table in the open convention space, not one of the interview rooms, and we chatted a while. And he knew and I knew that we were looking for somebody with a degree in hand. And we eventually found somebody, and we offered him the job. He said he agreed to take it. And then later in the spring, we got this curious letter from him saying that he had received an invitation, unanticipated, requested, to go and teach at the University of Virginia, and could he please be released from his contract. And so the college didn't want to keep anybody against their will, so they let him go, and we had to try to find somebody quick. And there was Greg Doherty ready to jump in and save the day for us, even though he didn't have his PhD in hand. So he came and started teaching that next September, and I fortunately had been renewed in Latin, and so we became the department. I was the chair because I was first one hired, and I had my PhD in hand, and I said I had some minor administrative work in my year at Hope College. I had to manage a couple little budgets. So I had some administrative and budgetary experience. So I was the chair, and Greg was the junior person. But then as soon as he got tenure, he became the chair, and I became the worker. And he was so much better at it than I ever was. He's just really, he knew how to work the system. He was a military brat, so he knew how to work systems, and I hadn't really a clue. So he became the chair, and he did such a great job of it. He's doing it to this day.
Oh, that's
He's
good.
been the chair all the time.
And I'll just say for the record that since Greg was hired, and I guess what would have been 1976, around that time, that the two of you have worked together all these years up into 2014.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think that may even be a record for some stability in the department.
I don't know.
I don't know. That would be interesting to find out.
Mm-hmm.
for a long, long time together.
We've worked well together. Greg has been a wonderful colleague. He, as chair, he always took. I always object when I have to evaluate him as chair because he always takes more than his share of the dirty work, and he gives me, and now me and Beth Fisher, more than our share of the nice things to get to do. He takes more of the work and gives us more of the benefits.
Oh, that's very generous.
Yeah, it is.
Well, speaking of understanding how the system works, you told me a story one time about attending your first faculty meeting or one of your early faculty meetings and what you later thought was speaking out of turn. Do you?
Yes. I know what you're talking about. It was, I think, my second or third faculty meeting, not the very first. There was a contentious issue before the faculty about whether we should or should not have merit pay. And it was a very big issue, a lot of strong feelings about it. And I got up and proposed an amendment to the motion. I don't remember exactly what the motion was, but I said that we should probably not have merit pay until the base pay that was being given came to equal the national average. And the President Luther Wright got up after I proposed this amendment and said in much more genteel terms that this was a very stupid idea. And the motion died for lack of a second. Nobody got up and seconded it, which is quite unusual at Randolph-Macon, it has seemed to me. Usually somebody makes a motion or an amendment and somebody will always second it just to get it on the floor. But I sat there and it died, waiting, and nobody seconded it. So I went home and I told my wife, well, don't worry about unpacking. We'll be moving again in a year or so. But I discovered that it kind of made my reputation with the faculty for having ideas and being willing to express them and taking a chance and speaking up for what I believed, even if no one else would join me in it. And that was, in some ways, the beginning of my reputation with the faculty.
Very good. Well, what were some of the issues? You mentioned merit pay. What were some of the issues facing faculty at the time when you first came, or over the years as you look back over your time as a faculty member here?
Well, the faculty or the whole governance system of the college was fairly new. The division of what are shared responsibilities between the faculty and the administration and the trustees, and what is the faculty, the curriculum, of course, is primarily the faculty's responsibility, and a lot of other things are shared responsibility. This whole system was new, and it was being tested and developed and trying to see how it would all work out. I came the semester after the faculty had its collective bargaining election, which failed, and that was just before I got here. So that was, the faculty were still pretty worked up about all of that and the issues that led to it. So that was a big issue right then.
So you mentioned the shared governance. Are there any other, or I would just ask, how has the faculty and administration relationship evolved during your time here?
It comes and goes. It partly depends on the economic situation. When the times are hard, then issues get tougher and people get more worked up about things. When things are better and the college looks more secure in its future and the pay raises are more in line with what the rest of inflation, the rest of the economy is doing, then people tend to calm down a little more. And I've been through several of these cycles, and I've learned not to panic when the enrollment numbers don't look good. Don't panic, but work at it and work together. But it's not the end of the world. We've been through a lot over these years, and over the longer span still, all the way back to 1830.
Well, you came right after, soon after we had a few classes of women, so you came soon after the college went co-ed. And I was just wondering if you wanted to reflect on student and campus life, what it was like 38 years ago, and how you've seen that change.
Well,
that's a big question.
It sure is. It sure is. I can speak more, I think, about it, what it was like back then, because I knew better. When I was young, I was a lot closer to the students for two reasons. First off, because I was young and they could identify with me and I could identify with them more closely. And crucially, the drinking age for beer and wine was 18. And so if the students were having a party, the faculty members could appear, and sometimes did. Sometimes you'd be invited to student parties. And so I think that the presence of faculty kind of helped keep things in line. Then they raised the drinking age to 21, and any student, pretty much all the students, if they were drinking illegally, and therefore the faculty should not, could not, and would not be there. So the students were sort of forced to be by themselves, and I didn't get to see much of the social life after that time. In the earlier days, you could drop in at a party and you see who was there and what they were up to, and who was together, and talk about the social life. But then it became the faculty and the students were segregated, in effect, by raising the drinking age. And so I haven't known as much now, and I have the feeling that at times the students could use some faculty oversight, or at least just presence, to help keep things under control.
Yeah, that's a very big issue. Yeah. Well, we've touched on this a little bit, but I do want to talk about the classics department as a department in the major, and you've had some really fun students come through. And as we mentioned, you and Greg have worked together for 38 years. Can you talk a little bit about the department, the classics tea, and different things that made classics special?
Well, let's see. We have really evolved over the 38 years. The first few years, we sort of set up our curriculum, and we changed the way things were done. Instead of one of us being Greek and one of us being Latin, we had both been trained in both Latin and Greek. So, but we did have different interests. So we divided the classes up. We rewrote the classes and the requirements in the first few years we were here, and we set it up so that each class was a different genre of literature. So we had a tragedy class and a comedy class in Greek and an epic class, and similarly in Latin. And then we divided who taught them. Basically, Greg would do the prose and the history classes, and I did the poetry and drama classes. And the literature and translation classes. So we both could keep our hand in both languages. And we got to see all the students that way. Because taking both Latin and Greek is is pretty tough.
Yeah.
It's pretty tough since they don't take Greek in high school, and a lot of them don't even take Latin in high school. To get to that proficiency level takes 2 years, so it's a squeeze to get ahead.
So most students who have a classics major have specialized in one language.
Yes,
and
right.
and that way you each are seeing them. That's
Right.
That's very creative.
I was lucky because when I was in high school, the high school I went to required 4 years of Latin, and you were allowed to take 3 years of Greek. So that's why I had really worked in both languages when I was in college and in graduate school.
Wow, that is unusual.
Very unusual. They don't do it anymore either.
So as you look forward, I mean, you and Greg have been, had this set up for so many years, but as you're retiring now, it would be hard to find someone. Will you go? Do you think you'll go back to the old Greek position, the Latin position?
I don't think so. Most graduate schools now require you to have both, and given the, what shall I say, the continuing tightness for jobs in classics, it's been that way since I came. People have to try to market themselves as most flexible, and so everybody can do both Latin and Greek, and they can, they have all, you name it, they can do it. Is the feeling. So I don't think we'll have a problem. And the young man that's been hired as my successor, Bartolo Natoli, his name is, and he's just gotten here, and he's starting summer school today, and he is so tied into Randolph-Macon already. He signed up for our website almost the day he got his PhD. He changed his status on Facebook to say he was assistant professor of classics at Randolph-Macon. So he is very excited. Very full of ideas and new ideas, and it's going to be really. He's very, very good, and he'll be very exciting. I'm looking forward to seeing what he brings to the department. And his wife is a Hanover girl. She went to Patrick Henry, in fact.
Oh, wow.
So that's part of why they're so excited to be here.
Excellent. That's very good. Well, I look forward to meeting him then. Oh, very good. What would you like to talk about the Friday afternoon classics tea?
Oh, right. Yes. I don't know exactly. I can't remember exactly how it got started. It was about 15 years ago, I think. We became aware that it was a long tradition. Robert Epps Jones used to have the students over for dinner each semester. And we had tried that from time to time, but students seemed not to show up very well. They weren't very good about coming, or even telling you they weren't coming. And so that didn't really work for us. And we thought, well, let's see if we can come up with another way to have a social connection with our students. And so we said, well, let's just have tea. I don't remember who thought of it or how it came about, but we started just making a pot of tea and getting some cookies and cake and inviting everybody and just sitting around and talking socially, not any heavy-duty program, not lectures, just to be together and to get to know the students and let them get to know us as people. And that worked out pretty well, I think, over the years. We've moved it from time to time, from day to day, depending on when the students are most able to come. Their schedules change as the college schedule changes. So lately we've been doing Friday afternoons because that's a quiet time in the college schedule at the present time. But whether it's going to continue or not is a question. Who's going to run it and who's going to make the tea and get the the cakes and things. And how will it be funded is also a question.
So that might evolve, as
It probably
Right,
will,
right.
right.
but the camaraderie and for the students to get to know others in the department and the faculty, that's very good. You've been very active on faculty committees and in college governance and service to the college generally. Would you like to talk about some of your experience in college governance or committees? Or
Yes, but I'd like to back it up a step.
Okay, sure.
When I first came, I had what we called B track open. I taught at A track and C track, so that's 8:30 and 10:40, I think it was, and I was free from 9:40 to 10:40, and so I went over to the snack bar, which we called the CX at that time. It was in the new campus center, but they still called it the CX for the campus exchange, going back to the PX after the war. And I went over there, and there were two other faculty members who were always taking coffee at that time, Bob Offenbacher and Burnell Pannell. And so they invited me to sit with them, and they became my mentors, sort of informally. And just sitting at the table and listening to those two talk and debate. They didn't always agree on things, and they were great debaters. And Dr. Pannell would always be smoking his pipe and covering pauses in his reasoning by stopping to play with his pipe while he figured out what he's going to say next. But it gave him it was a good prop for thinking. So I learned a lot from those two very, very different kind of old men who were very dedicated to teaching and very dedicated to the college. And so they did a lot for me. And so I've tried to, as I realized that I was getting older, I remember the first time I was at a faculty meeting after I'd been here 10 or 15 years only. I was at a faculty committee meeting, and I looked up, and I was the senior person in the room. And so I said, oh my goodness, I'm the institutional memory for these folks.
Wow.
And that's only gotten more extreme. And so I have consciously worked at trying to be a mentor to junior faculty. I have made it a habit of almost always going to lunch in the snack bar, or now over in Estes, to meet with the other faculty and to help keep them in perspective, so they don't get too upset when somebody over the issues, and try to remember that this is just an issue and we'll deal with it, and not to take it personally or not to think it's the end of the world, as I said before. So that, I think, has been my most conscious effort at working in the community of the college. I've served on just about every committee that there is for some time or other. I started out pretty much with ACAS, which was Bob Offenbacher's domain. He ruled that committee along with Bob Hopkins, the registrar. And I learned a lot by just being in the committee, listening, hearing how things worked and how the registrar worked, and how important the length of perspective was, that institutional memory that they embodied was so useful. It was maddening, too, for a young person when somebody would make a suggestion, and either Offenbacher or Hopkins would say, well, we tried that 20 years ago, and the other one would say, no, it was 25. Are you sure? And they go back and forth. Oh, right. That's when so-and-so was a student here. And yes, we tried it, and it was a disaster.
As if nothing had happened in 25 years.
Right, right. And that meant it was impossible.
Right.
So as a young person, that would drive me crazy, but I did see the value at times of having an institutional memory like that. So I tried to embody it in maybe a more positive way.
And I think from my relatively brief experience here, I think you've really done that. And I'd just like to say for the record, you were the Higgins academic fellow who was my mentor when I came, and you took me to lunch several times at Estes when I first came, and so you were really paying that forward. Yeah.
That was, That I didn't think of that. I didn't think of that. I used to love being a Higgins fellow. That was a great position. Mentoring new faculty and working with faculty generally to help them and consider educational issues and techniques.
Very good. Well, thank you. Well, I did want to touch on one thing that I noticed in thinking about your teaching, that you've had an interest in using computer technology and computational linguistic applications in your teaching. Can you talk about how that interest developed, and especially with the teaching classics?
Well, let's see. It was in 1984. The college had a program by which the faculty members could buy personal computers. They weren't called personal computers then. They hadn't been invented. It was a K-Pro. Before DOS was invented, the operating system was called CP/M, and these computers had 64K of memory, of random access memory, and no hard drive of any kind. All of the memory had to be on floppy disks, and they were literally floppy disks, the little bits of plastic that you had to stick into the drives, but the memory in the computer was 64 kilobytes. But it was such. I got interested mostly at first just to be able to do my own word processing, to be able to. I wasn't a very good typist, but at least it was easier to do it on a computer, to make corrections on a computer. There was no spell check yet, or at least not automatic. You had to sort of run it. When you were done, you ran it through spell check, and it would mark the errors. Anyway, but that's how I got started. But then it had all these other programs with it, and so I got involved with the database program, and I became the faculty expert outside the computer science department for the ordinary faculty members with the database program. And I'm trying to think how I got started. Oh, I remember. We had a grant that we could apply for to develop computer applications of this tutoring program that we had, and you could adapt. It was basically set up to do questions and answers, and you could write a little script of questions and the possible answers and the responses. And I applied to do it, but then I decided I didn't want just to say, what case is puellam? And I wanted it to make up a Latin word form and ask the student what case it was, and then be able to make up the form at random and identify a correct answer. And so I started working on a program that would generate random Latin verb forms. And I found that there were I knew at some level, there were very few rules that create all those 700 Latin verb forms. There's about 15 different rules that go into it, and you make different combinations of them, and you end up with 720, I think it is, surface forms of Latin verbs. But they're pretty systematic. And the teacher could make them up, the computer rather, could make them up at random in a matter of seconds. And then I've figured out a routine that it could take the students' answers and then analyze. If it said, first word it said was I, or typed in was I, then it had to be first person singular. If it was you, it could be either second singular or second plural, and so on. The computer had keys that told it, identified the various parts of the form, and I put down what the English keys for those, so it could in effect check their translation just for simple verb forms, and that's how I got involved with using computers, and that was my first program.
Wow, were you able to share that with other teachers?
Yes,
elsewhere? 'Cause it
I even got to sell it for a while.
I was wondering.
I must have made at least $40 or $50 over the course of 5 or 6 years selling that program.
Oh, interesting.
But it was fun. It was fun, and it got me started. And I realized that students I wanted students to read in the Latin word order. It's kind of revolutionary then. Now it's become much more accepted among Latin teachers. Not to do the old-fashioned thing where here's a Latin sentence. The first thing you do is you find the verb, wherever it is in the sentence. You go look for the verb, then you look for the subject, and then you look for the direct object, and then you start looking for adjectives, jumping all around in the sentence to decode it,
Right.
not to read it. And I wanted them to read in the Latin word order. And so I came up with different systems for making sure that the students could not jump ahead. You can take a file card and cut a corner out of it, so the student is only revealing one word at a time as the file card moves across. And then I came up with a computer program that would take a computer text and show it to the class one word at a time. And then I got involved in seeing if I could expand that program that could just identify the verb forms to identify the noun forms and start putting them together into sentences, if they could translate whole sentences. And so I got a grant for that to spend a whole year sabbatical at Carnegie Mellon, which was the big school for artificial intelligence at that time. And so I worked on a program to do that, and I got pretty far with it. It could do simple, straightforward sentences. It could do fairly simple subordinate clauses. Relative clauses were just getting pretty complicated. And then I started hitting up against memory limitations, even at Carnegie Mellon, where they had wonderful computers. When I started doing real Latin sentences, trying to put real Latin sentences in, I found that I was running out of memory, because my process went through, take the first word, and it could be 3 things. The next word comes in, and it could be 4 things. And so that meant there were 12 possible interpretations. And after 3 or 4 words, it was filling the computer memory with all the different possible combinations of words. And so I said, well, there must be something else, because the Roman, reading in the Latin word order, couldn't have couldn't deal with all of that. They can't keep. Computers are great at keeping track of 12 different possibilities, but humans manage one or two, and that's about all they can manage. So that got me involved in looking at Latin word order and how it is involved with the cognitive limitations of the human brain, and how the human brain processes language, and how the Romans must have processed the Latin because it's a free word order language. And I discovered there are a couple legal forms of Latin, of order, that a Latin sentence is allowed to come in, but they never do it that way because it would be so confusing that the reader would get lost, and it would make what would be called a garden path sentence, where there are sentences like this in English where you have a legal sentence that nobody can understand. The famous one, they usually work when you're reading, not when you're speaking.
Right.
But one of them is, the horse raced past the barn, tripped. If you see it in reading, it's practically impossible to read because you forget when you see the horse raced, you think it's the main verb, but it's intended as the participle. The horse, having been raced past the barn, tripped. Right? If you say, like saying the car driven down the road crashed.
Yeah.
Because that ambiguity, raced could either be the participle or the finite verb. But once you hear that the horse raced, your brain assumes it's the main verb and doesn't even bother with the possibility that it could be a participle. So you end up with and so I found that there's some sentences like that in English, forms that the Romans avoided because it would overtax their cognitive abilities.
So it's interesting how your research or sabbatical project for using computer applications to do something very technical ended up being, really a linguistic study.
Yes.
And that kind of thing. So that's
And
wonderful.
even now, I'm reading a book that's got me all excited again, and it's called How Literature Plays with the Brain. And it's all about not just cognitive, but neuroscience,
Yes.
and how the language and literature and art and music, all of them use the possibilities that the neurobiologists are finding in the brain, and how it plays with the patterns that the brains like, but it also gives them they break the pattern. Literature and art and music will set up a pattern, and then they break it to give the brain a little exercise, a little chance to get excited and work on something. And so that's what I'm really interested in following up on in retirement.
Well, that's exciting. And as the college begins a new major in neuroscience, you might
That's
have
right.
to come back and have something to offer for.
Well, something to
Just
learn, I think.
to learn.
I expect I'll be a student there.
Yeah, interesting. Very, very, very interesting. Well, just since we were talking about the computer applications in language, the college had a computer literacy program at one. And still, I guess, has a component in that in the curriculum. But can you talk about the early years of what that was, or it was a?
There were two parts to it. One was a sort of technical side. You had to learn how to use a computer, and it was especially to do some programming, to know enough where you can make the computer do what you want it to, not just start a program and respond to it, but make a spreadsheet that would accomplish something. You manipulate data or use a computer. And that was the technical side. And the other side was for considering the issues, social, economic, political, and intellectual issues that were raised by computers, and that was the part that I taught in.
Mm-hmm. And how long do you remember that just evolved, that computer literacy, or is that
Yes,
just
it went on for about 5-10 years, I
mm-hmm,
think,
mm-hmm.
and then the whole curriculum was revised, and it became a computer requirement in directly in
Yeah.
the and the it was thought that people are using computers and technology in all of their classes already, so they should be considering how it's affecting their majors
Yes.
already, so
Right.
that there was no need for a separate requirement anymore.
Right. As it became more organic, really, in the
Right.
curriculum. Yeah. Well, good. Well, I do want to talk about mention two other things and let you have a chance to address a couple of things you were been involved in, and that is the Governor's Latin Academy, how that was established, and the Saturday seminars.
Okay. The Saturday seminars have been more in our bailiwick. That's strictly speaking a Randolph-Macon thing.
Okay.
Um, it started in about 1984, I think. I'm not sure. Pretty early on in our days, we became interested in working with the local Latin teachers. The Classical Association of Virginia has been sort of a model for other states because it is one of the most cooperative organizations at a state level, being careful to incorporate the graduate schools, the undergraduate schools, and the secondary schools, and now even the elementary school teachers of Latin.
Mm-hmm.
And we believe that that's part of why Latin is so strong in Virginia, that we haven't been living in an ivory tower. We're all working together and cooperating and collaborating. And we thought, well, what can we do in particular? And so we started to invite on a Saturday morning any Latin teachers. We built up a database of addresses and started sending out invitations to all the Latin teachers that we could reach in the state to come to Randolph-Macon for a Saturday morning, and we would give them a program. And the program consisted of 2 Randolph-Macon faculty members. That in the early days, that was me and Greg.
Yeah.
A high school or now elementary school or secondary school or middle school, that's the other thing, middle school teacher, and a college professor from somewhere else, giving a little presentation, a 45-minute presentation, discussion, workshop.
Mm-hmm.
The idea was every talk we give will have a packet of slides. Now they get a CD with
Mm-hmm.
pictures and text and things on it, and information that the teachers can use on Monday. We tried to keep it really, really practical. Not a lot of theory, but here's an hour's presentation that you can do with these slides on Roman toilets or curse tablets or here's how to deal with the relative pronoun in Latin. There are 2 ways to do it, that you can do this way. Here are the materials. So we tried to keep it practical. And we had, as I say, presentations by other teachers, by other professors, and our folks. Maybe 45 minutes, then a discussion, and then a little break with some nice snacks. And then we'd break for a nice sit-down lunch. The teachers love to have a nice lunch where they can sit down and be served and not have any duties and not have any students around to bother them. And they can be with colleagues and have some time to have some collegial talk and compare notes of their own.
Yeah. sounds very creative. How often you offer them?
We did them sometime in the early days. We did them twice a year, and I think we found that just the stress of the teachers have gotten so much more busy that getting a weekend that they could come. We do it once a year now. And we learned early on that the trick of getting the Latin teachers to come to something like this was to pick an SAT weekend, because when the SATs were being given, the best Latin students were busy taking the SATs, and therefore they couldn't have all these other activities for Latin students going on.
Yes.
So that was when the Latin teachers could come for our seminars.
Very
And that
good
was-
to reach the high school teachers.
Right.
Well, the Latin Academy.
Oh, the
that was
academy, yeah. That was an
begun.
outgrowth of the whole state of Virginia. The Department of Education really developed the idea of having the governor's schools or the governor's academies in all the different disciplines, all the different languages, all the different art, music, and science, drama, in college campuses for 3-4 weeks of the summer, residential immersion academies for the best students. This was intended to be enrichment for the best students, rising juniors and seniors. And so the CA, the Classical Association of Virginia, jumped on the bandwagon and helped develop a program to make sure that Latin was included among the foreign languages, and that it would not have to be speaking total immersion like the French and German academies have to do, but it would be different, and it would be total immersion, but not all spoken.
Right.
And so there would be a spoken and a reading component, and there would be cultural components as well. And so this was developed, and for 3 or 4 years it was at Henry and Henry, and then they moved to, before they even left Emory and Henry, Greg Doherty got involved. Greg and Kathy Doherty got involved at Emory and Henry for a couple years, and then the program moved to Hollins College, now Hollins University, and it was there for about 7 or 8 years, and I started going, and Greg stopped going, and so there's been a Randolph-Macon person, one or the other of us, ever since. And then it was at James Madison for a few years, then it was at VCU, and then finally about 4 years ago, VCU was giving up the non-immersion academies. And so we talked the administration into applying to host it at Randolph-Macon, and we applied, and we won the Latin and Japanese academies. I have been here, and so we've been having a wonderful time. It's just a great experience to spend 3 weeks full-time, 24 hours, 7 days a week, with the 45 best students in the state. It's just so exciting, and the best teachers. Very collegial, a lot of fun, a lot of stimulation, and we also get to recruit some of these 45 best students. We work hard at that, and especially now that they're on campus, we're really trying to show our best. The program was set up so that the host schools would at least break even. The budget allowed for a certain amount of overage, a reasonable amount of overage, but Greg says that he's in charge of the budget now, that the college is subsidizing it a little now. But we've gotten several good students, several of our best students
Yes.
have come to us through the Latin Academy.
They come and they have a great time. And
Right.
they're beautiful. They stay in the nice dorm and whatever.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's
very
right.
good.
And then they come and be students, and many of them have become Latin teachers, especially in Hanover County. So the Hanover County is happy about that as well.
Good. Well, I don't want to keep you too long, but I did want to ask you if you wanted to talk about your experience in teaching travel courses. You've had some nice courses
Yes.
offered through J-Term and different things.
Different under different guises. I've got to teach abroad several times. Greece in 1977 was through the a consortium that was basically from the Methodist Church. They did that for a couple of years, and then I started. I didn't go for a long time, and then Beth Fisher really got the department going and started in 2001. The whole department went in what was then a pretty new idea at Randolph-Macon as a learning community. 3 faculty members went, John, Greg, and I. Beth, Greg, and I. John was there as well, thank goodness, John Camp.
Yes.
And we each taught a separate course, and the students could sign up for any one of them or for 2 of them. But everybody had to go to every there were classroom sessions, but when it came to sites and once we were traveling around, everybody had to stick together. So since you're going to have to go to see all the sites that Dr. Fisher wants you to see, you may as well take Dr. Fisher's class.
Yes.
Or take 2 of them.
Yes.
They were allowed to take 2. So, but everybody had to participate in all of the site visits and the activities that we'll do on site. So that was our learning community. And so we went to Greece. We've been to Rome with a side trip to Britain to do some Rome in Britain. We've been to we went to Turkey, and I didn't get to go to Egypt, but some people have been on J-Term trips to Egypt. But I got to go to Greece, Turkey, Italy, and Britain personally.
Great trips for
Oh my, yes.
for these students and faculty. Good. Well, I want to thank you very much for all of your good memories and sharing them with us today. And I was just wondering if you had any other particular stories of people or events or anything you'd like to share.
Well, I do have one story that I always tell. When I got here, when I came for my interview, and I met Dave Chalice of the Romance Language Department, and he told me a story of a man that he had known when he was junior. Dr. Paul Miller. Dr. Miller had been a faculty member at Randolph-Macon back in the days when faculty were mobile, and one way to get ahead in the profession was to move from one school to the next and move every time you move up, like the real estate ladder. But Dr. Miller stayed at Randolph-Macon for quite some time. And so Dr. Chalice asked him as he was retiring, Dr. Miller, you were here for a long time, and you never left Randolph-Macon. Did you ever think about leaving? And he said, oh, yes. In fact, I even went and interviewed a few times at other schools, but I always came back to Randolph-Macon because I was impressed by the quality of the bitching. And so I made that part of my career. I've tried to maintain a high standard of bitching in my 39 years, and I'm trying to make sure that the new faculty members aspire to a high level as well.
To that same level. Well, thank you. We will keep that in mind as we as the years progress. I did want to just mention a couple of things for the record that you wouldn't want to say yourself, but I did want to note that you were awarded the Samuel Nelson Gray Distinguished Professor Award in 2002, and again in 2012. Is that right, or I'm getting mixed up? I think.
2012 was the Methodist.
I've written this wrong. Excuse me. Samuel Nelson Gray Distinguished Professor Award in 2002, and the Methodist Church Exemplary Teaching Award in 2012. I'm sorry for garbling that. And just this past December, you were honored with a seating dedication, which was really lovely, right outside Fox Hall, where you taught for many years. In between, I guess it's technically between Haley and Fox, where you taught.
And the library.
And the library. There's 3 in between. So that was very fitting recognition.
That was a total surprise. I was absolutely floored. It was after Saturday seminar. We were coming over to Fox Hall, where I was, along with some of the other teachers, were giving away books that we didn't need anymore, and I was giving away a lot of books. Mm-hmm. And I was trying to get into Fox Hall, and this former student who's now a teacher, was pretty much by force and violence forcing me to go the other side of the building towards the library side. And then I saw there was a crowd gathering, and then I saw, oh my gosh, it was a classics gathering. The classics department was there, and then my wife turned up, and I said, oh my God. And then I realized, that bench that they've been putting, it's for me. And it was a total shock and surprise. And they had written to all the alumni, and they had chipped in to the staff and alumni and friends had chipped in to pay for that seating area. And I was just so moved. Mm-hmm. I was amazed.
It was a beautiful, beautiful tribute. And I loved seeing you just last weekend at graduation sitting in that area. So
Yes.
that was great. Well,
I also, if any of the crowds were heading to lunch were getting too close to the shrubs, I told them, hey, get away from my shrubs.
That's right. Watch where you step.
Yeah.
Show some respect. Well, I want to thank you very much for coming and sharing your memories with us today.
Well, it's been a pleasure. I hope I didn't talk too long.
No,
because I got a million of them.
Anything else?
No, that's okay.
No. All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr.
Thank
McCaffrey.
you.